107.5 Sovereign Radio, the brightest sound in Sussex on a Wednesday evening, just coming up for 7:15.
The Mystery Hour is brought to you with Sign Wizard of Compton Street, Eastbourne.
And I'm joined by Alan Pemberton. Evening, Alan.
Hi, Simsy.
All right.
Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to tonight, I have to say. Radio
so
first. Radio first.
It will be a radio first. It's very exciting, isn't it? Well, we'll lead into that. We'll lead into that quite slowly. We're going to continue with our theme now. We've been investigating life after death and been looking at various angles of it. And my guest tonight is John Samson. So, good evening, John.
Good evening, Alan. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you here too. You've brought a little package along, which again we're going to tempt the listeners with, but we'll list it later. But we're actually going to be hearing for the first time, and I think the first time ever on radio, as far as I know, we are going to be hearing direct voice, aren't we? Voices from another world.
That's right. It's known as independent direct voice mediumship, which is unlike mediumship with which people are more familiar, where the medium will just speak to you, sometimes inspired, but certainly just as a channel and relaying what they're being told. This is a very rare form of mediumship, known as independent direct voice, because the voice comes from out of the air. Just as radio is on the air, you might say, except there is no radio. It's simply coming out of the air. It takes a long time to develop. The medium usually has a regular group of sitters with him. They act as batteries to help him. They supplement the charge, if you like. But, of course, the medium is the focal point. And he has to be present. And also, the tapes we're going to hear tonight, for example, Leslie Flint is the medium in this case. He was unique inasmuch as he did not go into a deep trance. Most mediums go into a trance when they're performing this kind of mediumship. He didn't. He could just sit there and indeed participate himself.
I think we should point out that Leslie Flint was probably one of the UK's greatest mediums, was he? And the most famous.
Indeed. Yes, indeed he was, yes. And reading his autobiography, Voices in the Dark, is an illuminating experience. In fact, there's a rather amusing story he tells when he was very young, and in fact he was an apprentice gravedigger, which is rather interesting. His boss was very scornful about the whole matter of spiritualism and mediumship, and he said to him at one point, "Look here, mate," he said, "I've been burying people for 20 years, and I'm telling you, it's when they are buried, they do not come popping up again." So, but Leslie was to find out that this wasn't quite the case, and there we are.
John, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in...
Yes, indeed. Way back in 1975, my wife and I thought we'd have a shot at the good life and self-sufficiency. And we thought, where would you go? What part of the country would you go to not to be in danger of having a motorway driven through your back garden? So we went to the Isle of Man. While we were living on the Isle of Man, I was going through the local newspaper, and I spotted this very small ad saying Spiritual and Psychic Truth Society meeting once a month at a certain place. And I cut it out, and a light bulb went on in the back of my mind, and I thought, this is something quite important, I think. However, I popped it in my wallet and promptly forgot about it. The next month, I saw the ad again, so I thought, come on, stop being so lazy. This might be very important. So I went along to a place that was a cafeteria during the day. And it was quite softly lit, and I thought, right, now I don't know whether I'm entering a nest of nutters here, so what I'll do, I go right to the back, the very back row, and be as inconspicuous as possible. Now, there was a medium there, as I learned, who came across from Yorkshire. He knew nobody at all. He gave a short talk, and then he began to come to people in the audience. And he spoke to them, told them things which presumably would have some relevance and value to them. Then he was just winding up, and he said, before I finish, I must come to the very back of the hall, which is where I was sitting. And I got myself right in the corner. I was in a position where he could not see me. I was completely eclipsed by the people in front of me. Quite tall chaps were sitting in front of me. So he said, I must come to the back of the hall. And then he spoke to the guy two along from me and said, the chap two along from me said, "Do you mean me?" And instantly he said, "No, not you." The chap next to me then said, "Do you mean me?" "No, not you." by which time I was slithering further and further down in my chair. So I sort of squeaked, really, and said, do you mean me? Yes, he said, you. And then he began to speak to me about me, really, about where I'd got to in my thought processes. And it was very clever, because although it was a public meeting, I wasn't in the least embarrassed, and he was able to tell me where I had got to, what I was thinking, and so on and so forth. Anyway, then the meeting came to an end, and I went up to him afterwards, and I said, I was very impressed. This is the first time I've ever been to such a meeting. But how did you know I was there? Because you couldn't have seen me. Ah, he said, I knew you were there because I work with a light. I said, what do you mean you work with a light? He said, well, he said, when I'm in semi-trance, there's a light which bobs about the room and comes to rest over the person to whom I must speak. A light hovered right over the corner where you were, and I couldn't see you, but I knew there had to be someone there. So I was very impressed by this, needless to say, and afterwards I spoke to the president, a chap called Charles Quastell, who was a very wise old bird, a medium himself, and of enormous experience. And he was the one who said, okay, look, he said, if you're interested, really interested, this is a huge subject. It's not just something a little old lady does down the corner, someone reading tea leaves, or a lady at the end of the pier gazing into a crystal ball. This is a vast and intriguing and very important subject. But I'll give you a book, A History of Psychic Science and Philosophy. If you're still interested, after you've read that, come back to me and we'll take it further. So that's how it all began. After that, I sat privately with a number of mediums, good, bad, and indifferent, and then I really began to study the subject. That's how it all began for me.
Good, thank you very much. One of the things we were going to discuss tonight, I mean, you do actually do your own lectures now, don't you? Like, you come along and you talk about...
well, to tell you the truth, why that started, Alan, was because I was becoming increasingly angry at the trivialization of this subject.
That's what I want to deal with
in
tonight.
The media. And I thought, now, people are not getting the facts. They're getting a terrible distortion. So I thought, well, what I'll do, first of all, I gave a lecture in Haywards Heath in May, and I was really testing the temperature of the water. I had a feeling there was a lot of interest out there. More people turned up to this lecture than I thought. I said, would you be interested if I pursued this? Yes, came the response. So I held another one on the 10th of September, which was, I called Life After Death, Open Forum for Open Minds. I expected, say, about 25 people to come if I was lucky. In the event, 80 people turned up. I had 3 speakers on the panel. I took an awful lot of photocopies along with me, photocopies of information about the subject, all of which went. Like a plague of locusts had been in there. And so I realized, yes, there is a lot of interest in this subject, and they really were amazingly ignorant about it, and one had to start from square one. And when you think of the coverage that the subject has in the media, you think, well, people probably have a grounding in this, but not at all, because it does tend to be trivialized. And
why do you think that it is trivialized, John? There must be some
I think the reason...
very basic reason for that.
Well, 20 years in on this subject, the reason I think it is trivialized is because a lot of people regard it as a threat. I think the establishment, the scientific and indeed the ecclesiastical establishment, regard the subject as a threat. And they, I think, rather concerned, and so they think if we can trivialize it and turn it into a part of the entertainment industry, really, then it won't be any trouble to us. But what is interesting is that this subject is the only subject on which science, the scientific community, and the Church have joined hands, and they both equally vilify it. And I think this is very significant.
Because traditionally they're enemies themselves, aren't they? I mean, the Church and science have war.
They are
forever.
They are,
but as you say, on this subject, they're
both threatened.
They are at one. Yeah.
They are at one. They both consider themselves threatened. I think it's because they both have their own formulae. They both have their own doctrines. And physicists can be as ferocious as churchmen, as medieval churchmen, in fact, in defending their doctrine. And if someone comes along to them and says, well, look, chum, actually, what you've been teaching for the last 50 years isn't quite right. Now, even Einstein, at the end of his life, and we're in the era of post-Einstein physics, even Einstein said at the end of his life, I'm not at all certain that anything I have said is right. But his disciples, it's always the disciples, it's always the followers who've taken it as, if you pardon the expression, gospel. And that's where the trouble begins. They are not sufficiently open-minded, they're not flexible enough. And there are a few people who see, certainly in quantum mechanics, which is now coming up with answers very similar to
where
the answers
truth sits.
Where the truth sits. Well, quantum mechanics is now coming up with answers that spirit guides coming from the other side were saying 100 years ago, which is interesting. So they are sort of coming together, but they'd rather, they'd cut their throat than say so. But those scientists who dare to put their head above the parapet are in trouble, because the establishment is very strong, both in the church and in science, and they're thinking of their funding, they're thinking of their careers,
Absolutely.
and think we mustn't step out of line.
So what you're really saying is there's probably a lot of young physicists out there at the moment that might, if they read the work of somebody like Ron Pearson, would probably say, yeah, that's right,
Yes.
this guy's on the right track.
Yes.
But Ron Pearson cannot get his work published in this country.
No,
He cannot get it peer-refereed. He's stopped wherever he goes.
Yes, I think
And he actually has the mathematics to
Yes,
prove his case.
That's true.
And yet he still can't
Yes,
get forward.
I know. In fact, I was quite shocked that the Society for Psychical Research didn't accept Mr. Pearson's thesis for publication in their journal. But the SPR, the Society for Psychical Research, I think is biased, I think, on the skeptical side. And it is dominated, I feel, by psychologists. They tend to think the whole subject is a branch of psychology.
Yes. Put
Whereas
psycho in front of something.
Yes.
It immediately has a sort of
That's right.
a linking with the human mind and all the rest of it. In fact, it's quite pragmatic, isn't it? Psychology and psychologists in general. I don't know.
Yes, indeed.
You know
there
what I
was-
mean? It's
yes.
it's not necessarily leads itself into lanes of philosophy or spiritualism or...
No. I think what they're anxious to do, I think many of the coterie, the central core of the society, it seems to me, want to explain it away rather than discover the truth. The College of Psychic Studies, for example, which is another organisation founded in the late 19th century, about the same time as the Society for Psychical Research, is much more open-minded and much more flexible, and I think, in a way, much more fruitful. The Society for Psychical Research tends to pride itself on being hard-nosed and scientific in its approach. And
yes, but not scientific enough to accept the work of a great scientist like Pearson,
No.
whose work would
No.
rock the boat completely.
It's the rocking of the boat that concerns them. And they are the one society in the world, of course, which should accept Ron Pearson's work. I have to say that I would understand very little of it because my knowledge of physics is... is practically nil. But those who do understand it say it is quite remarkable, and it is explaining a great deal that up to now has been regarded as hot air and hooey and fanciful. So it was very sad that it wasn't accepted for publication in the journal of the Psychical Society.
Right. John, we're going to come up to a break shortly. But as far as you're concerned, your research from that sort of very early position where you went into that meeting and you were selected and the medium came to you, you have no doubts in your mind whatsoever as a result of your own studies that we all survive death.
None at all. I think it's something that you have to take time over, think about. But the accumulated evidence is absolutely massive. There are 12,000 volumes in the library of the College of Psychic Studies, and an equal number elsewhere. And so you'd have to be really perverse to refuse to accept it.
Yes, yeah, okay. We'll take a break now. When we come back, we're going to listen to these extraordinary recordings that you brought along tonight, which are, in fact, voices from the other side.
Yes,
so that's something to look forward to, Simsy.
Is brought to you with Sign Wizard of Compton Street, Eastbourne.
And joining me tonight's Alan Pemberton.
Dr. Brown. And my guest tonight, John Samson, and we're talking about life after death. And in this part of the programme, we're actually going to be playing you live some voices that actually came from the spirit world. Now, this may be hard to believe, and it certainly is a first as far as I'm concerned, but you've experienced it, John, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
And so have I.
Yeah.
So I know what this is like. So, and you were with Colin Fry, who's quite a well-known medium.
That's right. Yes, I went to one of his
He's a
physical...
deep trance medium.
Deep trance, physical seance. He's kind of tied into his chair so he can't move, and he's in what they call the cabinet, which is, in other words, he's sealed off. I had never experienced this firsthand before, although I'd read and heard.
It's a hell of a shock, isn't it?
It is, and what surprised me was we sang, and the singing and music is which they often do on these occasions, is to get the vibrations tingling. The reasons for that only spirit guides and spirit operators know, but that's what they like. And then this voice came through, which was so loud. I was amazed. Very often, with independent direct voice, the person has great difficulty coming through, and it starts off as a croak and a whisper, and gradually gathers strength. In fact, the very first recording I ever heard was interesting. Is Professor Charles Richet, who was very important. He was the man who discovered ectoplasm, and he came through on a tape I heard years ago, and he started very soft and very, very slowly. And then, by the time he was at the end of speaking, he was going like a train.
See, but he did a lot of work, wasn't he?
Yes, a French physicist when people say to me, and some people do, they say, come on, this ectoplasm is just a sort of, fictional, isn't it? And I said, no, actually, what do you think it is? And they don't know, so one explains that Professor Charles Richet captured this substance in a flask, took it to his laboratory, weighed it, analysed it, broke it down into its chemical constituents, and gave it the name of ectoplasm.
And I bet that didn't get a great deal of publicity.
No, it certainly didn't.
No. Shall we now tell us a little bit about the first voice we're going to hear, which is John Brown?
Yes, there's a gentleman in Newbury who, over the years, has been very interested. He knew Leslie Flint and attended Leslie Flint's sittings and seances. And this is interesting. He rang me out of the... I didn't know this gentleman at all. He rang me quite out of the blue and said, I saw a letter of yours in a periodical about the subject of spiritualism and so on. And I just felt that I had to ring you and tell you I had these very rare tapes, because I'm afraid, that when I go, they may be lost. And I just felt you're the man to send them to. Or could you come and pick them up, because I'm very ill, I can't really, I can't get about. So I went up to Newbury, and he had these ancient open reel tapes in a box, just loose. And I brought them home, got them transferred onto cassettes, had them digitally enhanced, and these are what you'll be hearing tonight. The first one is of particular interest, John Brown, because many people will have seen the film Mrs. Brown with Judi Dench and Billy Connolly. When I went to see the film, I said to myself, I wonder if they'll miss out the entire point of this relationship between Queen Victoria and John Brown. And yes, they did. Because the whole point of it was that when Queen Victoria was in Europe on a visit, she saw a medium. Albert, her beloved Albert, came through that medium and said, there is a man on the estate in Balmoral who can help you get in touch with me again. He's a gilly. And she went back and discovered this chap called John Brown, who was a medium, and that's how the relationship and their friendship, that's really the core of their friendship.
So,
none of this was mentioned in the film.
So now what we're going to actually hear is Queen Victoria's gilly.
Yes, John Brown.
John Brown speaking through Leslie Flint.
And the voice comes completely out of the air, not through the medium, it comes out of the air.
I know, it comes from another place, doesn't it,
Yes,
altogether?
yes.
It's quite extraordinary. Can we hear that now, Brian, do you think?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
That's all right. I'm not quite sure if you could hear.
Oh, yeah, quite well. Quite well. You're Scotch.
I'm no Scot now, but I was. I went on your side. It was a long time ago now, but of course he, and there's no nationality in that sense. No. But as I come back to Earth, I pick up the thought vibration of my own self. But that's a long time ago now. Hello.
Yes,
You must forgive me if I don't do too well.
Well, you've done very well.
It's a long time now since I came back, you know, and I felt if I could possibly have a few words with you. But I feel a little bit shaky about this. I'm not very good at
You're
this.
doing very well.
At the moment, it's a long time since I last came through. It's John Brown.
Hello, John.
Aye, it's quite a while since I came and spoke, but I just felt that it'd be nice to have a few words if I possibly could.
Yeah.
Because I knew quite a bit about this sort of thing, as you knew.
Yes.
But when you've been here, as long as I have, you get in a wee out of touch. You lose to some extent the interest with Earth naturally. At the same time, occasions when I feel drawn back. And I feel at the moment very drawn back because, well, I don't know if I should say this, but I think you're going to have very shortly a member of the royal household joining us. And in a way, that has some little effect on us coming, not only me, but one or two other members of the family from this side are drawn closer to Earth. We have a feeling that it can only be a matter of perhaps a few months, if that. But that's not the real reason why I come. But I'm just telling you this now because it'll have some sort of effect. You know, it'll be an interesting taste, I suppose, you know, from your point of view. And I know, being myself a medium in the past, how interesting and important tastes are. Although, after a time, you get a little tired of them. People always want more and more tastes. Anyway, I don't want to talk about the past so much.
All right, John, we're very pleased. Whatever you've got to say, tell us, John. Anything you like.
You know, Victoria was very interested in this subject.
Yes, you told us that before.
Yes, and a spouse, her husband, you know, it was a great desire to make the contact with him, and that's, as you know, the story. Of course, all her diaries and everything were destroyed, which was a great pity because she kept meticulous diaries of all the things that appertained to. In fact, she had special little books that she kept with all her messages and things, and she'd often read them. We were very close in this work, although, of course, in her position, she had to keep it very dark. She had no had to make it public or anything like that, and we used to have these little seances from time to time.
Well, what about that then?
The reference to a member of the royal household passing over is this recording was made in October 1952, and I think it's the old Queen Mary who died in January the following year. Which is interesting. He was already mentioning it and saying someone from the royal family is going to be joining us, and indeed it was Queen Mary.
Well, what are you going to say? Loads of people are going to say, that's a fix, that's a hoax. Why should we believe that? Why should they believe that's true?
Well, this man, Leslie Flint, has been subjected to all kinds of tests. He's been tied up, he's been gagged, he's been immobilized. Indeed, one accusation was, well, it's some kind of clever ventriloquism. So the guy was forced to hold in his mouth coloured water. Fill his mouth with coloured water for the entire duration of a seance, just to prove it wasn't him talking. And interestingly, there was a lady at the SPR who attended one of these, and she is a real dyed-in-the-wool skeptic. And Mickey, I think, who is Leslie Flint's control, he's the master of ceremonies, decided to play a little joke on it because he was talking as he does from the air, rather like you've just been listening to John Brown doing. And she was sitting there at a little further away down in the room, and thinking to herself, no, this is there's something phony about all this. And no sooner had she thought that, than Mickey swooped down on her like a bird, right into her ear, and said, "Hello," with the name. "Hello, hello." And she shot out of her chair, and he knew what she was thinking, just to prove that. Then he went back to where he was. So it could not have been done by Leslie Flint, who was at the other end of the room.
What's the next one we're going to hear?
I've got Lillian Bayliss queued up ready to go if you want that one.
Yes, Lillian Bayliss. Now,
Quickly as you can, as we're going to run out of time.
Right,
I
I'll be very
desperately
quick.
want them to hear this.
Right, Lillian Bayliss created the Old Vic, was a great figure in theatre. Actors knew her very well and did distinctive impersonations of her. I, in fact, when I heard this tape, went to the National Sound Archives in London to compare a recording she'd done in 1937, the original Lillian Bayliss, if you like, to see how it compared with this independent direct voice. And I was amazed to find that they were identical.
Marvellous. Let's listen to it then, Brian, shall we?
Good morning, friend.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hear you very well
I do
indeed.
not know if you can hear me or not.
Very plainly.
Very plainly.
It's a very long time since I came to speak. Not quite sure now if you can hear me. I'm trying my best to talk to you through this box.
We can hear you very well
Very
indeed.
plain.
Very clear.
My name is Bayliss.
Bayliss. Oh,
Lillian Bayliss.
Lillian Bayliss.
Oh, were you the lady who had the old Vic?
I did.
Oh, I'm so pleased you've come through.
Yes.
I've come for a very special reason.
Yes. Come on, Miss Bayliss. Thank
Come on,
you.
Miss Bayliss, you're very clear. So she came.
Yes,
Well,
that's very interesting. That there you had a good example of a good demonstration of how difficult this must be for them to come through, because often you'll find that many of the communicators will say, "Can you hear me? Can you hear me?" Because they don't know if they can.
They don't know whether they're being heard
They
or
don't
not.
know, because we're projecting their thought through, this sounds very technical, an ectoplasmic voice box, and she was referring to that. And it's like being on a long-distance telephone line. They're not sure if the people sitting there can actually hear them, and they need confirmation of this. And and there's a long pause there at the end, and the reason for that is that it's almost like the early days of radio. You lose the signal, and you have to wait a little for it to come back. That's why that pause was there.
Wonder what I mean, do they have to? Do you think that they have to prepare themselves to make these sort of like an intervention into our dimension from their dimension? Do they have to work on it?
Indeed, what you hear is one person coming through, but there are probably about 20 or 30 people the other side helping, those who are interested in this whole business of communication. They're not on their own. And somebody once said to me ages ago, "Isn't it rather like, we shouldn't be doing this because you're raising the dead?" And I said, no, it's like a telephone. You open a telephone line. If someone wants to use it, they will. You're not forcing them to do this. They are doing it because they want to do it. But what you hear is one voice, but there are many others behind the scenes.
Doesn't this go back to what you were saying earlier on about the sort of the disinformation that goes on with these subjects? It's like, oh, this is all wrong. We shouldn't be interfering in this. You shouldn't be dabbling with this. It's all wrong. It's witchcraft and all the rest of it. They used to drown people and hang people for witchcraft. It's all the same thing, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
Yes.
Yes. Again, it's a question of orthodoxy, whether scientific or religious, resisting this area of inquiry, and one wishes that they would open up a little bit. I think that they will have to eventually, because they are coming by their own route through physics and through quantum mechanics to what we've been told for a long time now. But, of course, prejudice runs very deep.
There is a kind of chilling thought in all this, though, John, when you think about it. I mean, are we really meant to be communicating? Confirmation of life after death is one thing, but to set up some form of regular communication with this sort of, that would absolutely blow our heads off, wouldn't it?
Well, I think it was St. Paul, wasn't it, who said, to faith add knowledge. And I think this is what it's about, that if you're brought up in the Christian culture, the word faith is very prominent. But I have always thought, no, I'm sure there's got to be more than this. And I was interested in evidence. And that is why I've pursued pursued this study, and the more you read, the more you realize what a massive amount of evidence there is, and you find that even the skeptics are standing on an island which is shrinking year by year because the spirit operators realize what they're up against, and they're trying to find more and more convincing ways of saying, look, we are here, and we're only here to help you. I mean, you have freedom of will. We're not kind of trying to control you, but to make it very clear that you are part of a grand design. Life is on this plane is part of a great pattern, and therefore you move on. You're not just extinguished like a candle flame. You just step, as it were, from one room into the next. And we like to come, when people are upset or they're bereaved and unhappy, we like to reassure them, if possible.
That, I think, is one of the greatest, the most important thing about this message about survival of death is to bring comfort to those that are bereaved. And in so many cases, they've lost somebody that's very, very near and dear, a great loved one. There's nothing left for them, you know. And the greatest message that we can give to those people is that they will be reunited with that person at some stage. You know, they're just a little step ahead, aren't they, of the road that...
Exactly. They have just crossed a threshold, and we will join them in due course.
And bereavement, I was talking to my doctor about this, and he was saying that about 1 in 5 of his patients is actually there as a result of bereavement, a manifestation of bereavement in one way or another, psychosomatic condition. So it's very, very... I mean, that to me is the most important thing about this subject, is bringing that kind of solace to people that are bereaved.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I think, and the whole thing is of cosmic significance, really, because whereas this is the way that the proof, as in the real sense of the word, it has been said, and quite rightly said, that if the evidence for the afterlife, as presented through a high quality mediumship, were tried in a court of law, it would be proved beyond a shadow of a doubt if the judge's rules were applied to spiritualism or the afterlife as they're applied in any other case. But because it is the afterlife, people suffer a mental paralysis over this. And this has to be a fake, it has to be phony, it has to be fantasy.
That comes back again to what we were saying earlier. That's a conditioning, isn't it?
It is absolute conditioning.
We're conditioned into thinking in such a materialistic way
I think
that our ability to conceive of something else is virtually nil, unless you make a specific study or make the effort to go and pursue the evidence that's there. And as you said, there's acres and acres and tons of it. I wonder, should we not just grab this last minute and hear that last voice? Now, this one, very briefly.
Mickey. This is Mickey. This is the control. He's a Cockney boy who died in 1910, and he is Leslie Flint's control. And it's just a little. He's just referring to the conversation that Leslie Flint's been having with the sitters.
Right.
Mickey?
Bless you, my love.
What's he on about?
On about mediums in the past.
Oh, don't tell me you're talking about all that again, is he? I don't know what happens to people. There's good and bad everywhere, ain't there? At all times, past and present.
That's correct, Nolly.
Yeah.
Mind you, there are a few mediums I wouldn't want to work with. Never mind, that's how it is, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, he ain't so bad as mediums go. Yeah, well, I could say, but I better not. How are you getting on?
We're all fine, thank you.
Well, because I know how you're getting on, because I come and see you from time to time.
Yeah.
In your outfit.
Yes.
And your work you do, like. Can you hear what I say?
Yes, lovely.
And if you can't hear, mate, you better say, because I'm not sure as to whether I'm getting through proper.
You're very clear.
Yes. Nice.
It's difficult sometimes to know, you know.
Yes, there again, you see, he was saying, can you hear me? I mean, they always have to confirm that they are getting through. And Mickey is very good because he lightens the mood. He keeps it on a very informal, humorous level, and that's very important. People mustn't approach this subject with great solemnity, because that would be quite wrong, you know. I mean, in fact, it should bring great joy to people to realise, especially, as you were saying earlier, the bereaved. And now, this isn't a matter of faith, guesswork. It's a fact.
Yes.
It is an absolute, proven fact.
Yes. I mean, this thing about... actually, my guest next week is George Cranley.
Oh, yes,
who's,
yes, the Noah's Ark.
The Noah's Ark Society. And that's an
yeah.
organisation that's dedicated to
the development of physical mediumship.
Exactly,
Yes,
and that's where I had my experience of direct voice. And again, the medium. I think it was Colin. I think it was
Stuart Alexander. Yes.
Stuart Alexander,
Yes.
and he was strapped also to this
Yes,
sort of chair
yes.
thing. So there was no way in which this could have been
In
faked.
fact,
very
yes.
profoundly. It took me 2 days to get over that.
Yes, when you first see it, it does have an
is
enormous
extraordinary,
impact.
isn't it?
And
Yeah.
Colin has said to me, and that in fact he insists that he's strapped in. He said because he doesn't want any accusation levelled at him. That the kind of games.
John, we've come to the end of the programme. Thank you very, very much for coming and joining me on the Mystery Hour this evening, and thank you very much for bringing those amazing recordings. And, I mean, there are a lot of people out there tonight that have actually heard a voice from spirit for
Yes.
the first time, and that's quite extraordinary.
Well, if it sowed a few seeds.
But exactly, that's all we can do, isn't it? Okay, well, thank you very much, and good night to everybody. It's from Alan Pemberton and the Mystery Hour, and thank you very much, Simsy, for your help tonight.
My pleasure.
Good night, everybody.
Another interesting one, wasn't it?
Really, what was
Very intriguing.
Just
All
a
right.
bit.
And nice to meet you, John. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Thank you. Tomorrow evening we kick off the